And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. The global pandemic forced the entire world to rapidly change how business was done. Lockdowns and other public health decrees forced businesses to switch to remote or hybrid work. On today's Open Connection, Manyard Angus.
So, transformational pandemic, and why the title of the topic? Because it really transformed the globe, really. It transformed the way we think, and it changed our thinking. If it didn't have an impact on you, somebody you know had an impact on them, which changed you. Is a real story. It's a true story. And we just had the interpreter center complete, and we hired some summer students. And I went downstairs to see how the summer students were doing. And I walked in the inside door, and one of the young ladies is pointing and says, "There he is." And there were two men standing there that came over. They're both from Calgary. And one of the guys' name was George. I can't remember his last name, but his name was George. And George and his friend came to Prince Rupert. They heard about, the port's growing, Northwest BC is starting to happen, and they wanted to invest. And George walked up to me, and one of the first words that came out of his mouth was, "Why are the Indian people having a hard time with the port?" See, because in Alberta, they still call us Indians. Well, as you can appreciate, that caught me off guard. I didn't know this guy from Adam, and he says this to me. But what came to my mind, and I said this to George, I said, "George, imagine this. It's the year 1900, and there was a knock on your door, and it was Mr. Angus." I said, "George, I just came from Ottawa, and the government of Canada has granted me your house. I now own your home. Here's the deed. Manyard Angus owns this house. So, George, you need to move out of your house because I now own your home. You can go live in the shack in the corner of your property." 100 years go by. And George's great-great-grandson remembers the story of his grandfather telling him the story about his great-grandfather and how the Anguses live in that house that the government gave to him. And so, after George's great-great-grandson thinks about the story, he decides to go to the land title office. And to his surprise, the name of the house that the Anguses are living in is still in George's name. So I'm going to take this to court. And he does. And he wins that court case. The government of Canada and the courts grant George's family $100 million for the loss and the use of the house that Anguses are living in. Well, he thinks I won that court case. I'm going to go back to court. He wins a second court case. And the reason why he goes back to court the second time is because the corner shack that he's living in with his family, he sees the Anguses working on that house and working on the yard, and everybody's employed and everyone's working, but here he is in a corner lot watching what's going on. So he goes back to court and he wins that second court case. Consultation and accommodation. So now, anytime the Anguses want to do work on their yard, put a new roof on, whatever, my family's got to walk down to the corner and talk to George's family and consult with them first to say, we want to paint our house yellow. And until we can agree what yellow is going to look like, then I got to accommodate them. And that story I told to George. And I said, "George, that's why the Indian people are having a hard time with the port." Not that they are, but generally speaking, because he was asking me the question. And I tell this story because that's the lens that the First Nations were looking at or are looking at. We never gave up our land. We never gave it away. The government came and said, "Here you go." And that's what happened. So that's why we're having this conversation still today, is we never give our house away. The government of Canada said, here you go.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. On October 7th, 1763, King George III issued a royal proclamation establishing a new administrative structure for the recently acquired territories in North America. He also established new rules and protocols for future relations with Indigenous people. Let us return to the conversation as Manyard outlines how this 260-year document impacts Canadian law today.
King George III executed a document called the Royal Proclamation of 1763. So when this document was executed, and his influencers, the reason why this document happened is because there was a war between the English and the French. The English won, but the French had allied with the tribe from Ottawa. And there was a man, a chief, his name, they called him Pontiac. And Chief Pontiac had influence with the British. And after they won the war, the British saw the potential influence of the Indians in that country. And what are we going to do about it? So when you read this document, I honestly have said this many times, that it was brilliant in how it was written. You think it was written yesterday, but the minds that sat down and wrote this document was brilliant. The intent was there, but it did harm. And so when this document was written, they wanted to restore peace, because after this war happened, how are we going to restore peace with the Indians? And so as time went on, they said, we want to protect the Indians. It's in this document. The Royal Proclamation is a legal document, and it's alive today. And it's still playing out in the courts, and it's used for treaty negotiations. It sets out the guidelines on how they were going to control the Indians. It talks about where the reserves were created. We're going to take away your land, but we're going to reserve some space for you. And that's where it started. And then there was a man that came out about 113 years later, Charles Bagot. We've all heard of the Indian Act, but who is Charles Bagot? Charles Bagot, his report is the root of the Indian Act. So what he said in his report struck what we now know as the Indian Act, that is still alive today. We still, well, those that aren't in treaty, still live under this act. Remember I was telling you last night, when the act came out, elections was every year. We couldn't vote, couldn't go to a pool hall. I mean, there were many things we couldn't do. But this is it. And then in the Indian Act, it talked about how do you separate the children from the influence of their culture and their family. And they came out with this word, they called it the industrial schools. And the industrial schools, known as the residential school system, was the one that evolved out of the, we're going to move and we're going to change and we're going to take things away and we need to educate, because they looked as the Indians as wards of the state. We can't speak English, we can't read English, so we got to look after them like children. We're going to give you a medicine box, which became our health care. So here we are. We talked about residential school yesterday. What happened, right? And then, so if you look at how the law, the British law came and changed it for the First Nation people, it was the law that did damage. It was the law that put us in this valley. It's the law that we had to change. And so if you look at these men here, Frank Calder, the Niska, the Calder case, if you drive down Highway 16 and you see the sign that says Highway 113, Niska Highway, That 113 stands for 113 years that the Nisga'a fought to win this court case. So then you got Ron Sparrow. So Frank Calder was Aboriginal rights title. Ron Sparrow from the Musqueam Band, he went fishing for his community. And he got arrested, got thrown in jail, went to the Supreme Court, and they won. So now, right, recognize that not only do we have title, but we have rights to the title. We have rights to go fishing and to go hunting. It's in the Royal Proclamation.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. In 1967, Frank Calder and other Nisga'a elders sued the provincial government of British Columbia, declaring that Nisga'a title to their lands had never been lawfully extinguished through treaty or any other means. While both BC Supreme Court and Court of Appeal rejected the claim, the Nisga'a appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. Let us return to the conversation as Manyard shares how the province of British Columbia reacted to the court's decision.
The Calder case was a 4-5 win, but what is interesting about that case is it was not recognized in British Columbia, but it was recognized in Canada. It wasn't until the Delgamuukw case was won, then it was recognized in BC. What is really interesting about these court cases is that Delgamuukw Earl, he called me early in the morning and we talked, and I said, tell me about Delgamuukw, how did this happen? And he said, just like the Haida case and the Calder case, they went to the government and said, look, we need to talk. You can't keep issuing TFL licenses without talking to us. This happened on the Haida Gwaii. Government wouldn't listen. So what happened is it went to court because the government was not listening. And as a result, these court cases were won. So, the Royal Proclamation took away the land, the Indian Act, took away our way of life, the residential school, took away our children. So here we are. When I was growing up and we were known as natives, some of us would deny we were natives. Why? Because of the stigma that was attached to being an Indian. You guys are drunkards. You're lazy. You don't want to work. You get everything given to you. Free house, free health care, free dental, free education. I wish I was an Indian. But little did they know of what was going on. That was not even talked about in the history books. So you have to change the law. We never gave away our house. It's still our home. It's still our traditional lands. So the court cases went on. Aboriginal title, rights, and the duty to consult. So, and when you look at the bottom there where it says Death Valley here, that's really what it was like for us. So if you don't really truly understand what happened, like I said, it's not your fault, but it happened. So here we are, we're saying, we need to have a conversation with you, we need to engage, we need to sign this agreement, and we need to move on. But COVID hit. What happened? Right? Here we are. The new documents that are coming out. If you read this document and how it originated, the gentleman that wrote this document did some research and basically at the end of the day what this document told me was that there was a lot of harassment going on with the Indigenous people worldwide. You all have a document, and the company that you work for, you have policies. You've got an anti-harassment policy. Don't treat your employees whatever it's going to say. That's what this is. Don't treat the Indigenous people like this. We want to bring them up to a standard of living. We all want a quality of life, but that's what this was. And then the Truth and Reconciliation. You had this generation that was starting to pass away, and they were in their 70s and 80s, and they wanted to tell their story because it's not written in the history books. So that's how this was struck. Now they've got a museum and a library that has all the records of all this, what was told. We heard Cookpick Roseanne yesterday talk about her trip to the Vatican. What happened? We just want an apology. That's all. Just apologize. And then, yes, here we go. COVID hit, and it caused our thinking. I'm going to talk this afternoon about relationship building. It's common sense, or is it? Some people, when they walk in the room with First Nation people, and I've seen it, and no disrespect, please, but we're not from Mars. We're human beings just like you are. The red blood that flows in our bodies is the same color as yours. We're no different. Don't be afraid of us. So here we go. This resonated with me because I was one of them that did this. The millennials. You know, you've got your baby boomers, right? You've got your different generations, your Gen X, Gen Y, millennials. Now there's the alpha generation. But here, the millennials abandoned, there's what this happened, there's an article, abandoned our ambitions for passion.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Indigenous people have the right to make their own decisions to say yes or no, whether governments or corporations' proposed actions could impact their lives and futures. The exercise of this human right is known as free, prior, and informed consent. In this final segment of Open Connection, Manyard shares some stumbling blocks companies wanting to do business with Indigenous communities may face.
Know what the important conversation is. Do not get distracted by the noise. Because if you don't know what the noise is, you'll become part of the noise and you'll miss the important conversation. And so there's lots of noise going on out there, right? Businesses are trying to understand the First Nation culture. How does that work? First Nations are feeling overwhelmed. COVID hit, lockdown, band councils bringing food into communities. You can't leave your community. Some of the teachers and those that were not from the community can't leave for a week or two or longer. They're stuck in the community. And then there's the impact benefit agreements, there's the protocol agreements, the relationship agreements, the joint ventures. Oh, Mom, my head's spinning. And then the meeting engagements occurred in the boardroom and the council chambers. We signed an agreement. Why is there a roadblock? Why is there a protest? Where's the relationship? What happened to it? I thought we had a relationship. Why is there a roadblock? Why are there protests? These questions are still being asked today after meetings and sessions and conferences and in networking. We're still going, what's my relationship look like? You go back and you say to the boss, yep, we met with the First Nations. Who did you meet with? Oh, we met Sally at the front desk in the band office, and there was nobody else there, but we talked to Sally for a while. That was your meeting? Yeah, that was our meeting. So we met with the First Nations. Goes in the board report, right? And the board members are going, right on, good job. But you know what? When I sat on this board, Indigenous Works, which is a national organization, we did a study across Canada, 570 companies. We asked them a number of questions, and 83% of these companies said, we want to engage, but we don't know who to talk to, we don't know how, we're afraid. But everyone wants to do this. So you ask, well, what's the barrier here? Why isn't it happening? I talk about the infinite and the finite. You heard it yesterday. We as human beings, or we as First Nation people, we live down the road. We think about our grandchildren and their children, about the food that's still going to be, the fish is still going to be there. We think and we talk and we live by the seasons, right? We don't think, oh, September's here. No. The fall's here. Fall fishing, right? The moose going to come soon. The caribou's going to come soon. We live by the seasons. And that's how we look at life. So, then there's the finite, right? There's the end to it. If you think about a soccer game has two halves. Whoever has the most goals wins. The game's over. If you think about the war that happened between the Americans went over to Vietnam, the Americans went there to go in, win the war, whatever it was going to look like for them, and get out. But the Vietnamese were fighting for their lives, and it frustrated the Americans. And look what happened. They had to back out of that country because of the mindset between the two. Finite and infinite. You're going in there to do business, right, with the First Nations. What is your destination? Where are you going? Do you think our destination is to get in there, get this project built, and get out? And the First Nations are, thinking about the environment and the land. Is this going to be safe? Yes, we need employment, absolutely. But is this going to be safe? What's your destination? Well, there's the fear of the unknown culture, right? Remember what I said yesterday, is what you're not up on, you're down on. If you do not understand other cultures or the culture, then we just, whether we realize it or not, we just start thinking about the negative. We're human beings. It happens. Trust. You heard a lot about that yesterday. So, if you're thinking about the future and where you want to go, right? You ask yourself, why am I here today? Why am I at this event? That's for you to ask yourself that question. If you know why you're here today, and you know what your destination is and where you want to go, and what you want to do, what do you want this relationship to look like? It's not for your company, or it's not for your department, or for the organization you work with. It's for you. What is your relationship going to look like with the First Nations that you want to do business with? Because it starts with you. If you can wrap your head around what this is all about, then you're on your way. But if you're still wondering and questioning about that, this afternoon, we're going to have a conversation across the way at the Holiday Inn. I'm not sure. I think there's 4 seats left. It's a small room. You could still sign up, and we'll talk about that. What does the relationship look like for you in the community or the First Nations that you're thinking about?
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.